My name is Sarah Bird. I'm here to talk to you today about making data science accessible with visualization. I think I've turned off all of the things that beep and send notifications, but Peter, you need to stop messaging me because otherwise something embarrassing is going to happen. My name is Sarah Bird. I'm a software engineer at Continuum Analytics. You have heard from my colleagues Matt Rocklin and Peter today. We have a booth over there with Brian also, who is the lead developer of Bokeh, and I get to work with him as a core developer of Bokeh. You can find me on Twitter and GitHub at BirdSarah. And today I want to talk about telling data stories. And I understand that Jess, who I just saw gave a talk about this yesterday as well. And so hopefully we're going to not overlap too much. And I apologize I missed your talk, but I'm looking forward to catching up with it. I'm going to talk about two examples of where I've been involved with trying to explain people's fairly complicated research and to present it to wider audiences. And in both those cases, I'm not the data scientist or the analyst. I'm not the subject matter expert. So if you have questions about the science, I can't answer them. That's my get out clause always. And all of these projects were in some way or another for a wider audience. And they were all made using the fabulous Bokeh. Bokeh is a data visualization library. Matthew talked a little bit about this morning. I'll talk about it some more today. I'm not well-placed at all to answer when should I use this versus matplotlib versus plotly versus all of the other amazing tools, ggplot, things we're going to hear about tomorrow. I have zero credibility. I work for Continuum. I've been working on Bokeh for nearly 2 years now. So I'll just tell you my experiences and hopefully you can draw your own conclusions. What is Bokeh? Bokeh is an interactive visualization library that targets web browsers for the presentation, for the display of your visualizations. It enables you to construct novel graphics. It also has capabilities in it to do interactivity over very large or streaming data sets. Peter presented massive or big or uber large streaming data and data this morning. There's also like a middle category, which is where a lot more people as data live. So you can live in Bokeh and not have to, and still be able to interactively work with your data. We have a sort of no JavaScript required kind of policy. We have APIs in Python, R, and Scala. We have a TypeScript API. You can use JavaScript with Bokeh, and you can leverage all kinds of capabilities if you do that, but you can also accomplish a lot without knowing web technology. So I'm just going to dive a tiny bit into the weeds for a few minutes in case you get inspired and you think, Bokeh sounds amazing. These are just a couple of pointers to sort of hopefully point you in the right direction. The place I would say is a good starting point for Bokeh. It's a very large library, and I think that's one of the things we have a hard time communicating. But a good place to start is with our plotting interface. And so from bokeh.plotting import figure. And figure comes with a bunch of sort of hopefully sensible visual defaults, and you can do sensible things like change the x-axis label and the y-axis label and the grid and so on. And then it has a bunch of methods on it like circle, square, rectangle, ray, patch, and all kinds of things like that. And you can pass it lists of data, including not just your x and y coordinate, but lists of colors and lists of font sizes and lists of all kinds of things that you might want to be using to change and to drive your plot. And then you say show, and ta-da, a beautiful plot appears. And that plot will appear on a web page. I've copied and pasted it in here today. We'll hopefully get out of the presentation a little bit, but I always get nervous about running out of time at the start of a presentation. To dive in just a little bit deeper, at the heart of Bokeh is a thing called a column data source. And if you can get your head around that in the future, you are going to really understand everything. It's just a tabular data structure, like any tabular data structure, but its name in Bokeh is the column data source, and it's where we store all the data. We didn't explicitly define one in this previous plot, but one was made under the hood for you. But if you make one yourself, you can start to use it in all kinds of interesting ways. So in this example, we have taken the column rate, and then we've applied a color mapper to it so that we can start to apply percentages. We can turn percentages into colors. And then also, we are using that same data that's in our column data source to power the tooltips in our hover tool. And we have complete control over how that looks. And so that code will output something like this. And I'm going to let's start the tricky road of going into the browser. Here we go. Oh, it's tiny. Well, I'm not going to make it bigger now, but will later. So here you can see it's fully interactive. I have a save button. I can pan it around. I mean, that's not very useful for a map, but there's all kinds of tools, some of the interactivity that Peter showed today. And so, so that's pretty awesome. How do I do that? Play. Here we go. So what just happened? We wrote Python, and a web page came out. And it's easy to just do that a few times and not really think, wait, the browser just doesn't actually run Python. And so what happens here is that there are multiple separate libraries. So we have a Python library, which is called Bokeh. And when you say show or output or embed, it turns it into a blob of JSON. And then that blob of JSON is consumed by the JavaScript library called Bokeh.js. And ironically, I fell in love with Bokeh because although I was a web developer and I know how to write JavaScript, I didn't like writing JavaScript. And so I was like, sweet, I finally don't have to write JavaScript. And now I write a lot of JavaScript so that other people don't have to, which is not entirely the outcome I always wanted, but what are you going to do? Anyway, because of this modular structure, it means that we can have lots of bindings. And so we have, there's an R bokeh, a Scala bokeh, that do this same process of transporting the, they make the JSON, and then the same Bokeh.js library consumes that and makes your plots. So this at the moment is a one-way process. But with the Bokeh server, which is a Python only feature at the moment, although there's no reason why it couldn't be in other languages too, but it is a Python feature, you can say, serve my plot. And instead of being a one-way, like spit it out, you now establish a two-way connection. And so any events that are in the browser, panning, zooming, selecting, all of those events get sent back to your Python process. And any events that happen on your Python process get sent back to your browser. It's a very simple idea. Matt talked about it a little bit this morning, but the power and the scope of things that you can do with that are really quite astonishing. So I'm just going to show a couple of really simple examples with some pseudocode, but hopefully you'll get the idea. So as we saw, we've set up a figure like we had before. We've put a circle on it. And then the other concept that I thought, there we go, I highlighted it. Spoiler alert, I'm so bad at this, sorry. So the concept here is the cur.doc, which is not a great name, but the document is the sort of bag of all the things that get turned into JSON that end up in the browser, and it's the document that is this sort of object that holds all the state. And so we add our plot to the document, and then we say, and then we have some function that goes and looks on the internet for new data or checks the database or whatever it needs to do to go and look for new data. And then we add a periodic callback. And so, can I get this to, right. And so we add a periodic callback, and then we can say, Bokeh serve this script, and then it's just going to run that update function every 50 milliseconds or however long we want or however often we want and check for new data. And we don't have to run any AJAX calls. We don't have to, the user doesn't have to do any hooking up. We've taken care of all the magic for you, and you'll have a web page that's updating and a server that's updating, and the connection, which is a WebSocket connection for those who care, is just handling all the rest. You could also, so that was an example of using, the data was updating on the server, and that data was just coming down whenever it was appropriate. But you can also do it the other way. You can have a drop-down widget, a select widget. We have a whole bunch of widgets built into Bokeh. And then you can say, when the selection changes, please run some code for me. And so you can build a dashboard like this where maybe you have some data and maybe people who you want to expose to maybe analysts or people who are not data scientists, you want to give them the opportunity to play with a bunch of different clustering algorithms. And so you can just make a drop down, and you've got some server in it somewhere that has enough power in it to run all the clustering algorithms, because your browser certainly doesn't. And they can just go and start picking different clustering algorithms. That selection gets sent back up to the server, and now the server can run any Python code you can think of. You can tap into that full PyData stack of amazingness that is that's out there for us to leverage. And so there's lots more to Bokeh. You can make dashboards and custom layouts. We have a whole Bokeh.charts area that I'm not going to talk about today, which is where you can really do sort of statistical one-liners when you're really in your exploration kind of phase. We have lots of built-in widgets. You can build your own custom extensions if you don't like the widgets that we have, because I often don't. We are open source BSD licensed. We currently have around 100,000 downloads a month, and our version 1.0 is coming soon. And whilst we have been saying that for a while, it really is coming soon. So watch out for announcements end of this year, early next year. So back to telling data stories. The first one we're going to look at is, oh, sorry, I've jumped ahead of myself. Okay, first we're going to look at sorry, let me gather my thoughts. We're going to look at a project I did which was a collaboration between Tsinghua University and MIT called the China Energy and Climate Project. And it's a very big project, and they do many pieces of research, but one very large-scale piece of research they did, you don't have to read all of this, but is exploring the impacts of climate policy in China on energy, emissions, air quality, and health. So China has a pledge to reduce their CO2 emissions over time and to increase their non-fossil fuel energy share, which is about a 4% decline in CO2 as like a scenario. And the goal of this research was to develop intuition about different types of climate policy that you could impose and like how that would all play out in the future. And this work is just epic. You know, it's a team of grad students. It combines an energy model with air pollutant emissions inventories, and then they take the outputs of those models and then they stick them in a state-of-the-art atmospheric chemistry model that takes like another 2 days to run. And it's like this big piece of work. And so luckily, I'm not going to explain it all to you in the next 17 minutes. But what I was coming in to do was to help try and explain their findings. And the first thing that I always ask people is, who are you trying to communicate with? Are you trying to communicate with your future self? So any of us coders know that we look at our code that we wrote 6 months ago and we're like, what was I thinking? And I think that's also true in analysis and data science too. Are you trying to communicate to your teammates, your boss's boss's boss, other departments, the public, which is an answer I get a lot. That was the first answer that the MIT folks had, and that's not a good enough answer. So we managed to narrow that down to policymakers, and who gets narrowed down a little bit more when you ask, well, why? Why are you trying to tell people something? And so the motivation in this case was that COP21 was happening in Paris last December, and this was novel research, and it gives people important information about China's policy positions, but it also can provide intuition for other large emerging markets. And so this starts, and now you get a flavor of, okay, who am I really trying to talk to, and like, why are they here? Answering who and why doesn't require you to know any code, it doesn't require you to know any libraries, but it is like two of the hardest questions to answer. So if you're just getting started in this field, if you can get good at answering who and why, you'll get a really long way. So the next thing is what, and I always like to characterize this as a level of detail problem. I have yet to come across anything that can't be described in a tweet or a PhD dissertation or an interpretive dance for that matter. And so I think the Ig Nobel Awards 24/7 lectures are a great example of this. And this was the hardest thing about this climate project, is that it was just this massive piece of research, and we really needed to boil down their findings into something very straightforward and really work on crafting a narrative. And so crafting a narrative is the process I like to think of as taking the what and turning it into a really coherent message that people can like easily consume. It's about presenting your evidence, explaining your understanding of that evidence, and allowing a reader to draw their own conclusion, which is hopefully the same as your conclusion, but it's not about dumbing down, it's not about prescribing, it's about sort of taking them on the same journey that you're going on. And this is really the art of it, and it's very much an iterative process with a whole bunch of other factors that I'm going to try and cover. First thing to remember is to always be accurate. I found this amazing tweet on the internet. This is just not how graphs work. Like, in no way, it doesn't even add up. Like, there's so much that's wrong with this. I don't think that anybody in this room would be guilty of this kind of egregious behavior, but it's always good to remind people too, you're trying to present a truth. The second thing is to use your data to do your design. As somebody that isn't doing the analysis, this is something that affects me a lot, and maybe there are some other people in the room who this would apply to too, but I've been caught out many, many times. One example would be when we had a designer who was doing mock-ups, and she had created these beautiful sort of spark lines that were going to live on the sort of left of the web page, and then there was going to be more information on the right. And so we started building out all of that functionality while the client was sort of still getting their data together. When the data came in, it was just not data that was conducive to a spark line. And so we just had all these weird horizontal lines on the left of the page that looked like the screen was glitching or something. And so it's really important to do your design and your narrative in the context of the real data, and where you're almost ready. So for me, I'm typically exploring and analyzing data for the first time, usually in Jupyter Notebook, hopefully soon Jupyter Lab. For you, if it's your work you're trying to present, it's probably you need to start thinking about your message, and you have to start thinking, getting out of your own head, your own analysis, its current presentation, which makes sense to you, and into the mind of the person you're trying to talk to. You're going to start thinking about, am I showing trends or correlations or outliers? Am I dealing with quantitative variables? Is this what you talked about yesterday? And all kinds of things like that. And there's a lot of resources out there to help you with that. These are a subsample of the books that live on my shelf. All of them I love. There are also loads of videos out there. This conference will be another resource for everybody to use. There are blogs like Visualizing Data and Junk Charts. There are also lots of academic papers, if that's your thing. And then there are wonderful examples on the internet which you can go and collect and critique for yourself. And all of these things sort of continue to inspire me and play into this part where I'm actually trying to do this work of visually encoding the message. And the constraints of the final format start to come into play at this point. Am I doing a web-based interactive? Am I doing a one-shot, like one-off graphic, or what have I got? And so what was really the hard part in the CECP analysis, and actually just nailing down the message was the hard part. And so we came up with this website. It was a very, very simple website. It was a statically hosted website, which had sort of two halves of line graphs in the first half and maps in the second. And there's not really any fancy visualization in here. It's really just about making your message and making it with clarity. The one little thing, for example, one little detail, for example, is that we color-coded the scenarios, and we kept that color coding consistent throughout the whole site so that people had that continuity. And there's always little tweaks like that you can make. The next project I want to talk about is one that is sort of still ongoing, working with the Healthy Birth Growth Development team at the Gates Foundation. And they're a group of data scientists who are passionate about using data and technology to really reduce suffering and improve the lives of communities around the world, and trying to find novel ways to work with data and to gain new insight. And so I was presented with this white paper, and it was an analysis of multiple time series data for growth stunting using linear mixed models. And so it was data from around the world about malnutrition and a whole bunch of other data indicators, so related to the economy and health and the environment and all this kind of stuff. And they had collected data, well, they had data from about 20 years, and they wanted to cluster the countries and then identify other factors that related to these clusters. So the who was fairly clear for them. It was a fairly near group of people, other stakeholders around them, but they whilst people were interested in knowing the research findings, they were also interested in trying to communicate their methodologies better and trying to help people understand what they really do, like what's behind this black box of data science that these folks are getting, these folks are doing. So we start just by presenting the malnutrition data over time. We talk about the fact that a model is applied to the data, and then we take that model and we come out with a predictor, and then we use that predictor to do the clustering. And so once we have these two clusters of countries, we can start repeating that same analysis. We can apply the same methodology to all the other indicators and see what indicators give similar clusters. And in the white paper, you then just magically jump to this heat map of the Pearson correlations between the 56 significant predictors. And how many people are like familiar with heat maps and Pearson correlations and that kind of stuff? Right. So there's a whole bunch of you who this is like gotcha, information density, like makes loads of sense. And there's a whole bunch of people who can look at this and can see some stuff, but they're not getting anywhere near the meaning that you're getting from that. And so what I wanted to do was to, and part of the problem here is that you've really abstracted away from the question you were trying to answer, which is, how do all these other indicators relate to the malnutrition? And so what I tried to do was inject a few more steps in here. And so the first thing that I did was this is far less information dense than that cluster, but what I wanted to show was the repetition of this process over and over again, so people could start to see that happening. And you can sort of see the blue on the left and the red on the right that sort of corresponds to this anti-correlation that you're seeing in the data. And then the next step is that those bars themselves get put into their own clusters. And so a lot of, that's roughly speaking what this Pearson map, heat map is showing us, but hopefully the barcode sort of type approach on the left keeps you much closer to the original question we're trying to answer and helps people understand how you got there. I'm still not entirely happy with the barcode thing. I'm continuing to experiment with other things that may be easier, because I've had some feedback. And so this is where Bokeh comes in for me. It gives me the opportunity to do my experimentation, my process, my prototyping, and all that kind of stuff, and then move into like the crafting and the like fine-grained customization all the way through to deployment. I haven't got too much time left, but I wanted to highlight a couple of other things. I really like this expression that you should assume an intelligent and impatient reader. And it comes from sort of the world of journalism and science journalism, where you shouldn't overestimate the public's knowledge. Like, they don't know about a linear mixed effects model or some other specific, machine learning algorithm that you're working on. But that doesn't mean that they're stupid. That means that they just don't know your thing. So you don't have to dumb down your work. You just have to lead people through in a way that they can relate to. And the last thing I like to do is, especially with big interactives, and I'm not sure I'm going to have time to show you this, but there's this awesome infographic about sumo wrestling on 538, and it's basically just one piece infographic, which you can see in the bottom right corner, and you can play with a whole bunch of different variables and stuff. But to build into it, they highlight specific little vignettes that live in the data, and they help draw that out for you, and that helps you to not just be looking at this amazing graph that if you press some buttons, then stuff changes. It helps you to actually like dig in and see the nuance that's in the data along with the person who originally created it. And it's only as I get right towards the end of this process that I start to think about interactivity. I've yet to do something with insane amounts of interactivity because I tend to find it's just distracting and it doesn't really tell you something. The one thing it does offer is the opportunity to present your data in a slightly more compact way. It often lets you put sort of 3 plots in one and have a little bit of a drill down. But I think don't overdo it, and I think be very deliberate when you are going to do it. And so there we have it. You've got to have a cheesy fireworks thing at the end. Those are the factors that I use to tell data stories. And I use Bokeh, my favorite data visualization library, as I might have mentioned. I want to take a brief interlude, which is why I was hustling a bit, because this morning Chris mentioned that there aren't many options for publishing and composing interfaces in Python. And whilst that might have been true a while ago, I don't think that that's so true anymore. I think that Bokeh offers a way to do that, but I think that, excuse me, I think there are not only Bokeh, there are lots of tools that let you do that. And so I wanted to just show you. This is a static HTML page with some plots and some text. This is written like all in Python and sort of no server required to host. The Bokeh server, which I talked a little bit about earlier, lets you do, let's make this a bit bigger. Can we see this? Lets you build in these drop downs and do these sort of interactions where I can start doing this. And again, this was all written in Python as well. The The cool thing I think about Bokeh Server is you can even get to the point where you're not even making any plots, you're just using the widgets to the idea for this interface actually came from a user on the mailing list who was just using the widgets, the data table as one of our widgets to display his work. But you can do things like, if you select this, and then it updates the histograms and so on. There's also Flex. Flex lets you write Python, and then it compiles it all into JavaScript. And so you can make things like this cool, spliny thing. I don't use Flex on a day-to-day basis, but I wanted to highlight some of the other tools that are available. Here's the Python code that wrote all of that. There's HoloViews, which got a little mention today. That's much more less about creating like custom visualizations and more about making slicing and dicing and exploring your data really easy. And there's probably many more that I don't know. Most of the people who work on HoloViews and Flex and stuff are people that I know through the PyData ecosystem and Continuum. And so I'm not saying there's also Dash, obviously, that had a whole talk this morning. So that's not a finite list, but I wanted to highlight some of the other libraries that are out there. So here are some resources for getting started with Bokeh. And yeah, I'll take a couple of questions this time.
Are those projected maps that you showed, like Texas
These
and
one?
the U.S. and the world? Like,
right.
You do this on with a projection?
Right. So Bokeh doesn't have any projection stuff built into it at all. HoloViews can have multiple backends. So Matplotlib is a backend for HoloViews. Bokeh is a backend. Datashade is a backend. So and there's a GeoViews part of HoloViews, and I believe that does have projections. We're definitely thinking about like a bokeh.geo as like a separate but maintained library. Yeah, it's not in there. That was a long answer.
Is GeoViews associated with you guys?
GeoViews is a HoloViews project, and it's worked on by Continuum folks too, but it's fully open source as well. Oh, Matt's got a question. My plant. This better be a softball, Matt.
Yeah, so I'm obviously a plant. Where does Bokeh suck?
Where does Bokeh suck? Geo, I think, is a great example. I'm like just the worst person to answer that question because I know there's two reasons. One, I've always been a hacker. Like when I first started using Bokeh in like 2.5 years ago, it really sucked. Like the very first thing I tried to do, it couldn't do. And so, but I like hacked my way around it because that's kind of how I think. And so, yeah, ask on the mailing list. People say the documentation could be better, but we really do work really hard on that. And if anybody's into documentation, we would love to have you join. Oh, the gallery sucks as well. Great. Okay, nice. There we go. This one. So the gallery on Bokeh's website is not great, and we do want to improve it. What is an amazing resource is the examples, which you can download either from this link or they're all in the GitHub repo. And so some of those examples that I showed you today of like the selection histogram and the CSV thing, those are all, there's about 100 examples in this zip download that you can use. We're done. It's like, we're done. Get off the stage. Thank you.